How's it going, everybody? It's your boy. And I say I just finished, but technically it was a couple of days ago. I just finished the God Delusion by Richard Dawkins. Now, for those of you who don't know who he is, Richard Dawkins is a evolutionary biologist, an ethologist, an author. He's a person who's known for the gene-centered view of evolution, middle world, which essentially is the world in which human beings and most other mammals inhabit, which is time flows at a certain rate for our brains and stuff. He mentions it in the book, but it's a little bit complicated to go into, but that's essentially what it is. The extended phenotype, which is what one of his books is named after. And of course, he created the concept of memes, although not in the sense that we know it on the internet. And also for his advocacy of science, criticism of religion, and new atheism. I mean, he was, of course, one of the four horsemen of new atheism. Now, this is his book of that movement. His tour de force, like Hitchens, was God is Not Great, and Sam Harris was Letters to a Christian Nation. Maybe he did The Moral Landscape as well. I don't know which one was his tour de force, his manifesto. And of course, we can't forget Dennett. He also had his own. And this is where they all outline their beliefs, why they think the other side is wrong. And, you know, I agree with most of it, actually. So I'm not going to do a chapter by chapter breakdown, because that would just take too long, and I don't really remember as much now because it's been a couple of days. However, I will go through them and give you a brief outline of what I agree and disagree with. Do bear in mind I do mostly agree with him, at least for now, until I've done a bit more research in specific subjects like morality, which is an ongoing project of mine for a future video which may or may not happen, but I'm going to try. And so we start off with chapter 1, which he explains why he is a deeply religious non-believer. Essentially, culturally, he is brought up to be a Anglican or a Catholic. I think it was both, but it's mainly Anglican. The English tradition, I think most people know what that is, and I think he tries to make a distinction between the cultural aspect of it and the religious aspect of it, because you do get atheist Jews who also, to some extent, indulge in the culture of Judaism. Like maybe they celebrate their Sabbath and things like that, and you know, like atheists can also celebrate Christmas and Easter and join in with all those festivities, you know, things like that. It's more the cultural thing. It's the thing that they've always done, the things that they always will do. That doesn't mean that they believe in God and things like that. Then he talks about deserved respect and undeserved respect. Now, deserved respect is, from what I can gather, is essentially things that deserve respect through, you know, the good things. So, like, maybe, for example, for science, it deserves a respect because of the evidence that it can actually bring forward to prove what it espouses, things like that. So, gravity or even quantum physics and things like that, you can respect that. It deserves respect because it can prove what it's trying to tell you. Another thing would maybe be the actions of a particular movement or a particular group of people. So those who wanted to bring the vote to the working class men and also women, they deserve respect because of the things that they did. Now, some of these things also happen to be very open to criticism, and that's another thing that makes them deserved of respect. However, undeserved respect is something where we have like a group of people or a concept like religion or just religions in general and put them on a pedestal. So you can't criticize these things, you can't say something bad about them, you can't be nasty, you can't be critical, you can't even be dismissive, because that's bad apparently. You know, how can you say such a thing about somebody's beliefs? It was a very culturally relativist thing, and he really doesn't like that, and I think that's what undeserved respect is. And you know, I get these concepts and I do agree with these things. He then talks about the God hypothesis, which is basically the belief that God exists. So we go with his polytheism, monotheism, secularism, and the founding fathers of America, where he points out that most of them were at most deists or pantheists, and atheists or agnostics. So there were some who were Christian, obviously. But to say that America is a Christian nation and was founded as a Christian nation is not true. Maybe the culture is Christian. Maybe because of the secular nature of America that has allowed this underbelly of Christianity to become basically the dominant force, because in other nations like Britain, where there isn't actually a separation between church and state, because the Queen is not only representative of the state but also of the Church of England, she is essentially our Pope, somehow we've become more secular. Although I think that's also maybe the European way of thinking about things is different, especially the British way, and maybe that's another thing. He then discusses agnosticism and noma, which is non-overlapping magisteria, which is a view advocated by Stephen Jay Gould. It's the basic idea that science and religion each represent different areas of inquiry, facts versus values. So he believes that science should only stick to understanding how the world works, whereas religion should talk about things like morality and meaning, although people like Sam Harris and Richard Dawkins disagree. They say that science can and should have a say in these things and can actually explain it. Whether or not that's true, we'll find out one of these days. But that he disagrees with that, and I can see his point on that, but I'm going to reserve judgment. He then discusses things like the Great Prayer Experiment, the Neville Chamberlain School of Evolutionists. That's basically a nickname for people who appease religious people. It's those who believe in belief, and we've seen a lot of that on YouTube recently, actually, with agnostics like Black Pigeon Speaks, atheists like, maybe Academic Agent has said that. He said a few things like that, and maybe I've misinterpreted friended. Sorry, mate. But you're kind of like that from what I could gather. Nothing wrong with it. That's just your opinions, and Dawkins disagrees with that. The Great Prayer Experiment, for those who don't know, basically it was a study actually done by a religious group to see how prayer works. Can it actually help people recover from diseases and things like that? And they had 3 groups. They had ones who didn't know they were being prayed for, they had one who did know they were prayed for, and one that weren't prayed for at all. I think it was 3 groups. Now, the ones who did not know they were prayed for, the ones who were not prayed for at all, just basically recovered as normally, as you would expect. Now, that doesn't mean that the power of prayer actually works, because here's the thing, those who knew they were being prayed for actually didn't recover very well because they got stressed out. They wanted to recover because all these people were praying for them and they felt under pressure. So it ended up negatively affecting their recovery, which didn't exactly help this religious group's aims, but at least they did it. These were people that I think Dawkins praised them as being pretty, honest and open to inquiry, and that's something that I also respect as well. And then chapter 3 further expands on the God hypothesis, talking about Thomas Aquinas' proofs, the argument from beauty and personal experience, ontological arguments and a priori, the usual stuff that everybody who is into this kind of stuff understands. It's all the typical theist arguments that you can easily debunk. So I don't really have anything to say about those because it's stuff that I already know about, stuff that I already agree on. And then chapter 4 is essentially why there is no God, or at least certainly is none, because he can't say outright or absolutely that there is no God. And then he does a really good, interesting thing where he has a scale and it goes from 1 to 6. And it's 1, I think, and that's a very good scale. I think that works. I think that is something that a lot of people can agree with and can point to a number to say where they are. He then discusses the roots of religion and the roots of morality, and these are in chapter 5 and 6. Now, it's interesting because he touches upon meme theory. He believes that religion was not something that is naturally inherent in humans. It's something that was developed aside from us. So our genes do not make us religious. He believes that there is no religious gene. He hasn't seen anything to suggest that there is a religious gene, that there is a genetic need for it. There is a psychological thing from nature that makes us need it. He thinks it's a meme, it's something that developed after the fact. It's something that comes from outside, it's artificial, it's a mind virus, and that's what he believes, that it was invented either by one person, a group of people, or maybe it was a collective thing, maybe it was a group thought thing, but I don't really know, and that's something I have to, again, look up for in my future video. He then discusses the Bible, the Old Testament, the New Testament. He discusses how the Old Testament is of course horrible, and the book of Joshua, and how genocidal it is. I mean, some of the stories, how can people even believe this? Basically God says he's okay with sacrifices, specifically human sacrifice and also animal sacrifice, which is interesting because some of these sacrifices, it's very similar to the Romans and the Greeks. They would sacrifice lambs, but never people. But well, I'll get into some of these things in a minute because he touches upon some of the gender stuff, and but it's kind of interesting the stories that he does show, because again it helps his argument because of certain things that humans just can't help. Then he discusses about Hitler and Stalin. Hitler was not an atheist. There is no evidence to suggest he was. Now, he could have been a deist, maybe. He could have been some kind of religious person who believed in the higher power that much. At some points he believed in the Catholic God, other times he didn't, in the 40s. However, he never said that there wasn't a higher power at that time. He had criticisms of religion, he had praises of religion. Stalin didn't. Stalin was an atheist. Dawkins' argument is that they didn't do it because of these religious beliefs or lack of them. It was more to do with the politics, and that's something that I also agree with. Chapter 8 is about, you know, the creationists and intelligent designers' attempts to subvert science, how absolutism has a dark side, and how if you're too absolute, this can blind you, and things like that. And faith and homosexuality, how they don't like the homosexuals at all. And then he discusses faith and human life, and how a lot of these religious conservative types really hate abortion, but they seem to be totally okay with young men going off to fight in countries and losing their lives. And this is what a lot of atheist comedians touched upon in the 90s. So like, I think it was Bill Hicks may have said something like that. I know George Carlin definitely mentioned that. How can you not care about somebody's life from when they were born until they're 18, and then suddenly decide, yep, off to war you go, you're a hero, good job, these people will be martyrs, essentially. And, you know, it's the same in Islam as well. I think it's the same with any religion that is openly hostile towards abortion and won't take any pro-choice stance, or at the very least a compromise, maybe. I know a lot of Christian sects like Protestantism who are okay with abortion when it comes to certain things, so maybe the woman's life is in danger, or maybe the child will have something wrong that might end up killing it even when it's born anyway. So, but he discusses that interesting paradox there. And then he talks about the moderates and how they, being moderates in faith, can foster fanaticism. And we've seen this with Islam. You know, the moderates don't criticise the radicals, or they make excuses for the radicals, or they try to paint the radicals as not truly them, when you actually look at it, it's the radicals that are truly Islamic, who are truly Christian, who are truly this, truly that. And they're not really doing a good thing for their religion. They're not doing a good thing for us as people. They're actually making it worse. They're allowing these people to do what they want to do. So, for example, bombing abortion clinics, or bombing countries, or running over people in trucks. They allow these things to happen rather than, you know, take a stand and say, no, this is not what our religion is going to be. However, unfortunately, most of them do not. Although you do get people like Majid Nawaz who do not allow these Islamists to get away with the things that they say and do. So, you know, there's that. And he's trying to at least reform the religion, unlike some people. Imam Tawhidi would be another person like that. Chapter 9 then discusses childhood and abuse and escape from religion as an older person, or maybe as a young person as well. So discussing how, you know, it's stupid to label kids as Muslim kids, Sikh kids, Christian kids, because these kids really, they don't really have a concept of religion. They don't really understand it. They're just kids. It's better to just leave it open to them to explain these things, and when they're adults they can come to their own conclusions as to whether God exists or not, and if they want to follow any kind of ideology. It's wrong, morally wrong and reprehensible to brainwash these kids at an early age, even if you think it's a good thing. Like, you may think it installs morals or something. No, do not brainwash these kids. Do not teach them this religion, or at least teach them about it, but do not make them this thing and let them come to their own conclusions. That's essentially what he believes. Like, even with atheism and science, he'd rather just teach them about it and then let them decide for themselves. And I think that's a healthy thing. It's about teaching people critical thinking rather than faith. That's his thing. And then allowing people to leave these religions and to show them that, look, even if you think you're alone, you're not alone, and that these religions can be very horrible to people because they create an othering. It's an us versus them mentality. It's very cult-like. If you leave, you become a pariah. I mean, in Islam, they will kill you. And he discusses apostasy and how, you know, so-called moderates and religious leaders will shirk the question. They won't answer it when he tells them, well, what is the penalty for apostasy? They won't say, because they know what it is, but they're trying to make Islam look palatable to the public. Or maybe the Christian. He then discusses consciousness raising, and he says this throughout, and that's one of my main criticisms of him, which we'll get to. And then finally, chapter 10, it kind of goes full circle, discusses certain things, and I think the greatest part of the book isn't necessarily the arguments against religion. Actually, it's presenting the idea that science and how it explains the world it actually makes the world more beautiful, makes it more interesting. The fact that the way light is actually a spectrum, and how science has found out all these things and created all these things. Now you can have all this wonder and fascination and these cathartic experiences and not chalk it all down to God. It doesn't have to be a religious experience, it can just be ecstasy, and I think that comes across very well. I think he shows a love of life. I think he shows far more of a love of life than some of the fire and brimstone types who would say that atheists present a nihilistic attitude towards life. I think he actually tries to promote an opposite view of that. I think he tries to promote a very positive attitude to our society and the world, and I think he thinks the world can and is and will get better because of advances in technology and culture and things like that. And I think he does actually debunk that stereotype, and I think it's inspirational. I think that's the strongest part of the book, and I think that's the best thing that somebody should take away from this, that atheism itself does not have to be nihilistic. I think that's people projecting their own onto that, because the Old Testament is a very nihilistic book, whereas the New Testament isn't. So I think they're projecting that onto atheists. I mean, some atheists are nihilists, but so are some religious people. Now, here's my criticisms. Now, this comes from the MRA within me, and throughout the book, he never even mentions how bad religion is for men. I mean, he will mention men who have had bad experiences. It's not their unique experiences as men, although he will constantly use examples of how religion hates women. Now, from what I can gather, I don't think they actually hate women, more they have very specific roles that are very, I guess the word would be oppressive, or at the very least limiting to women. I can't really think of a good word to describe it. It's a very traditional, very backward view of what women should do, but I do not think that comes from hate. I think that's a very blue-pilled feminist outlook on these things, because I don't think that the people who wrote the Bible hated women. I don't think the Jews at the time, the Christians at the time, the Romans, etc. hated women, more as they had a different view of gender roles. They didn't have an idea of freedom as we know it today. They didn't have an idea of what men and women are actually like back then either. But it's just a consistent use of that, and it got really tiring, and it was pretty clear that he really didn't understand what he was saying in that regard, and it was a very biased view. And I think this becomes even worse when he talks about consciousness raising. Now, he rightfully points out, whether you agree with that or not, that Darwinism and, you know, the discovery that Darwin made about evolution and his theory, not his hypothesis, the theory is in practice, the hypothesis is the presenting of the idea, just for those who don't know, raised at least scientists and, you know, people who are maybe laymen but understand the theory as a workable, practical thing. That raised their consciousness, because it completely explained how life forms can develop. And it's not by chance, actually, it's not. Natural selection is not by chance. But I don't want to get into these specifics. That raised their consciousness, because from then on, loads of different things were achieved in biology, and to a lesser extent physics and chemistry. Because of these discoveries, science, I think, truly came into its own, and that's a consciousness raiser. It was a game changer. And he tries to say the same for feminism. Now, he isn't a feminist, and he does say that, you know, they talk about pronouns now, we shouldn't say salesman, we should say salesperson. I think he kind of, you know, admits that, yeah, this is tiresome, stupid, and they get really worked up about this, and it's not really worth being worked up about, but it raises your consciousness, because you realise if you say a salesman or a policeman rather than a salesperson or a police officer, that's somehow excluding women, even though it's not, because we have the opposite word for that, and that's a saleswoman, a policewoman, a actress, or an actor. Like, you know, we have gendered terms. There's nothing inherently wrong with them, and I don't think that raises anybody's consciousness. I think, if anything, it makes it worse. I think it, well, deflates it, for lack of a better word. These things set us back. And of course, I'm talking about this in hindsight with all the things that have gone on since then. And even he probably doesn't believe this anymore, because, you know, his many altercations with them, and the fact that they even caused him to have a stroke. Obviously, he's no longer that blue-pilled, but it really shows that he was wrong, so wrong. You just can't compare feminists to Darwin, or to other scientists that have pushed the boundaries, or even philosophers who pushed the boundaries of what it means to be human, or what it means to research, or discovering things about the world that we couldn't possibly have imagined. Like, they've done nothing like that, and they will never do anything like that. And it's with these things, and the fact that, you know, there was a very gynocentric view of religion and the problems that it causes. I mean, he doesn't even mention males that have been circumcised, because he talks about FGM, but he doesn't discuss MGM. I mean, Islamic people also circumcise boys. In fact, pretty much all Muslim boys, and a lot of Muslim women and girls are circumcised. But it depends which country you're in and which Islamic culture you're a part of. But boys get circumcised, and in Judaism, all boys get circumcised. I don't know about women, I don't know about girls, but I know that boys do. I mean, I think, even though it might not have had the power that, say, FGM has in provoking a response from a person, but the fact that there's a ancient Jewish practice where the rabbi, when he's circumcising the kid, bites off the foreskin and spits it out, when the kid is still a baby and the baby cannot have any kind of anaesthetic because it's a baby, that's a horrible, grim image. I think that's something that makes me want to be sick every time I hear it described to me or when I read about it. That is something that could provoke a visceral response in somebody, even if, you know, they may be a little bit gynocentric and don't really care. Come on, that's a horrible thing to do to a baby, and it was outlawed for a reason in most places until New York decided to legalise it at some point, like maybe 10 years ago, maybe 5, I can't remember when it was, but it was around about that kind of time frame. Like, that would have been a great point to make. It affects everybody in negative ways, but he didn't do it. Maybe if it was written today in 2018 rather than 2007, he might have included that, but I don't know. And it's with these factors, these things that he says, where you can see just how easy it was for Atheism Plus to develop and the SJWs to take over, because it seems, at least the people like Dawkins until later on, they were very susceptible to this because they were already sympathetic to the SJWs and their ideology. They were never quite there and they never did go there, but the fact they were more welcoming to these groups of people than, say, the conservative atheists or these centrist atheists shows that the SJWs came in and everyone was like, hey, how you doing? And then they took over and started to ruin things. That's how Atheism Plus happened. You can see the groundwork was there. They already had a framework. They already had a structure where they could get in and just tear it down. They literally walked through the door because there was already some sympathetic ideas there. Now, I've read Hitchens' book and I've read parts of Sam Harris's books, and of course they don't appear to be susceptible. One, because Harris is purely talking from a scientific perspective, not a philosophical one, whereas Hitchens, because he's very clued in on authoritarianism and things like that, I don't remember him ever showing that kind of crack that Dawkins showed. And ultimately, I think New Atheism paid. I think atheism itself in general, the movement for the secularism and things like that, I think that really got itself punished for those misgivings and those problems, the susceptibility. So what do I think? Well, apart from those blue-pilled aspects, he can be very red-pilled because he doesn't agree with cultural relativism. He doesn't believe that just because this is some person's culture, that means that it's right, that means that it's the same. He obviously does believe that the liberal secular democracies that we live in are superior to the theocracies of Islam, the tribal bullshit of many other primitive societies that live within certain countries in, say, the East or Africa. And he certainly thinks that it's a better alternative to the ideas of some of the most extreme American Christians. And I like that. And that's something that, you know, people like Sargon have always said. And he was saying that in 2007. So that's pretty red-pilled. And I think that was at a time when those ideas, that cultural relativism was beginning to take hold. And it's a shame that most atheists seem to ignore that. Or at the very least, didn't realise how important an idea it was. I mean, obviously, there was some who later became the anti-SJWs who always agreed with that, but the fact that the SJWs came in and completely ruined it, it's just interesting. So, does it hold up? Yeah, it holds up. It's still a very good read. He's always been a very good writer, always a very good speaker, and I think he creates very cogent arguments. His writing style is very good. You can kind of like read it in his own voice and you just imagine how he would say it, and I think you should definitely check it out. I don't think he's even trying to preach to you or anything. He's not trying to convert you. In fact, he discusses how stupid that is, I think, in the book at one point. Ignore the blue pill type of shit, you know, but, you know, it was of its time. And obviously he doesn't believe in that anymore, I think, from what I remember. And, you know, just read that and say, yeah, he's wrong. Just, you know, just take it as it is. It's a good book. Still holds up. It was well received for a reason. It has this great reputation among secular people, at the very least, for a reason. I mean, hey, even some religious people can appreciate this. He is a good writer, and you can't admit that he's a terrible debater or a terrible ideas man. I give it a 8 out of 10. If we're going to review it. Not as good as God's Not Great, even though I think it's probably, at least in the science side of it, much better than his, because, well, you know, he is a scientist. That's just my opinion, man. Anyway, it's been your boy, and until next time, I'll see you later.